One of these is a vicious circle and one of them is a virtuous circle. You've got this horrible problem where you've got this weird circle of want to say this is stupid, what do you mean? The reason they died out and the reason why believing 2 + 2 = 5 was not beneficial to their survival was because it's not true, right? And do you think that that's a good response to this?
I think
that circle is consistent and self-contained and gives you this access to truth, even though it's still circular. I'm not sure if there's no answer, but I'd be curious to hear an argument for why we are able to trust human intellect and rationality as a reliable guide to truth.
Oh, this is a fascinating one. I've been thinking about this. This has been actually really playing on my mind recently.
How can we trust human intellect to get us to truth? If there's no God, there's no divine guiding principle. Just to sort of lay this out, for the materialist, the brain is just a bunch of atoms bumping into each other. Right? It's just it's kind of like a rock or a piece of wood or something that happens to have developed this weird thing called consciousness. But there seems no necessary reason why it would have to be formed in relation to truth. We were just talking a moment ago about how it makes sense to believe certain things that are false because it's beneficial for us, right? Now, if it happened to be true that actually applied writ large to things like the laws of logic and mathematical truths, we'd literally be incapable of knowing. Because it might be the case that it's not that 2 + 2 = 4, it's that believing 2 + 2 = 4 is beneficial for my survival, and that's why my rationality evolved to believe that kind of thing. And somebody will come along and say, yeah, but hold on, it just can't, my brain just can't conceive of the opposite. We can know it to be true a priori. And I'm that's because that's how your brain evolved, right? There were people who believed that 2 + 2 is 5. It's just that believing that was not beneficial to their survival, and so they died out, leaving only us. Now, people will want to say, this is stupid. What do you mean? The reason they died out and the reason why believing 2 + 2 = 5 was not beneficial to their survival was because it's not true, right? And do you think that that's a good response to this?
I think this is one instance of just a general problem of circular justification in philosophy. And just so here you've got two claims. You've got one about epistemology and one about ontology. And effectively the question is, how are we going to get them to play nice together? And the trouble is, on the classic Aristotelian model of philosophy, you have a bunch of branches of the outer branch of the tree, and you get to the middle and it's metaphysics or ontology. It's the stuff that is. This is why Descartes' Meditations on Metaphysics is called Meditations on First Philosophy. It's because metaphysics is the first philosophy. And I think that the trouble is that there is, in practice, there's an interplay. There is mutual dependence between your epistemology and your ontology, because your ontology will justify your epistemology, but your epistemology has to justify why you believe in your ontology.
What is ontology and epistemology?
So epistemology, the study of how you can come to know things, and ontology, the study of what is. So my epistemology, that's a really good example of where somebody has put forward the argument that ontology has undermined epistemology. The idea that we are simply evolved creatures, atoms bumping together, and that's all our brains are and that's all our rationality is, has undermined or purportedly undermined the epistemology. And then this is kind of fascinating, right? But then you have to assume the reliability of epistemology in order to come to any sort of ontology.
Yeah.
So when the theist, it's not just that the theist argument is circular when they would say, oh, well, God would ground that. It's but prior to God grounding it, how do you know what's the preconsidered reliability of your epistemology that has allowed you to know that your reasoning chain from God existing to the reliability of your epistemology works? But this is sometimes posited as a problem for the theist, but it's not. It's a problem for everyone. It's a problem for everyone, right? It's because of this. It's because what we know is predicated on what we think is, and what we believe is the case is predicated on what we think we can know.
Yeah. So
here is an interesting one. Let's address the first problem. He gave a fair example of someone saying maybe the reason why we have evolved into logical creatures is because maybe believing in something not true isn't beneficial for our survival. But the problem is that he is already assuming that the evolution has produced in us something as the truth. And the problem is that truth is not a material object, but abstract or immaterial. Then first, how does he justify it from his worldview? Secondly, with the same justification example that was provided, I don't even know how will evolution select something based on truth, since evolution doesn't care about what is true, but it's all about survival. Let me put it this way. According to atheist philosopher Thomas Nagel and theist Alvin Plantinga, evolution is concerned with survival, not truth or rationality. A brain that forms useful but false beliefs could still survive. An example would be, a person might believe eating red berries pleases the forest spirits, and survive by coincidence. The belief is false, but evolution wouldn't care. It works. And then the question would be, so why would evolution give rise to something as truth-sensitive and self-correcting as logic? So, from an evolutionary standpoint, there are already problems on grounding truth based on his example. If all we are is chemical based on evolution, and our thought process are just avalanches of chemical reactions, then how can our brain produce the truth? Remember, chemicals produce reactions, not meaning. They don't mean anything or make claims. A chemical reaction just happens. It has no intention, understanding, or content. Truth is about propositions, not particles. If thoughts are only chemical reactions, then they're not rational. If all your thoughts are caused by chemical processes, like brain chemistry, and not by reason, then your beliefs aren't based on what is true. They're just the byproduct of chemistry. Based on that worldview, the final conclusion is that our brain cannot produce truth. And since it doesn't, then it shouldn't be trusted because, as I said earlier, evolution isn't about truth but survival. Then whatever we might think is truth might not really be the truth, but just maybe a coping mechanism created by our deceiving brains.
So we'll break this down, even if just for your sake, Alex. I could see you looking sort of panicked over there because there's a lot of words. And I think, no, don't apologize. That's what we're here for. But I think I want to make sure that I'm understanding what you're saying. There's like a circularity potentially in the God justification in saying, well, I can trust my rationality because God grounds it. That's what Descartes does.
Yeah.
And one of the most famous criticisms of Descartes' work is known as the Cartesian circle. It's this circle of like, well, if you need God to justify your reasoning ability, how do you reason that God exists in order to justify that reasoning ability? And it sort of goes around in a circle, right? And so think about like the atheist version of this, or the atheist problem here, is really put together best, I think, by Alvin Plantinga, his evolutionary argument against naturalism. So he specifically makes the case that if you believe in evolution, I've talked about this a lot, right? If you believe in evolution and you're a materialist, assume you're a materialist, you believe in evolution by natural selection selects for survivability. It doesn't select for truth, which means that if you believe in evolution, you believe that your reasoning faculty has not evolved to be sensitive to truth, but to survivability. Why do you believe in evolution? Oh, because you've reasoned your way into it. But the thing you've just reasoned your way into, evolution, has undermined your ability to trust the reasoning process that you've used to reason into it. So he sort of points out that like you can't be a materialist and believe in evolution, because believing in evolution undercuts the reasons you have for believing in evolution. The thing is, right, one of these is a vicious circle and one of them is a virtuous circle. Because for the atheist, you've got this horrible problem where like you've got this weird circle of like oh, well, yeah, okay, like I believe that it's just atoms bumping into each other that has no connection to truth, and that's produced this belief, but it's that belief which has caused this reasoning and you're getting all messed up. You know, the theist goes around in a circle, but they say, okay, sure, it's circular, but we all have to start somewhere, and everyone's circular in some degree. But my circle is one that says, well, God justifies reason because he's an agent who is, you know, the foundation of truth and gives us access to truth. And yeah, sure, I've used my reasoning faculties to get there, but that circle is like consistent and self-contained and gives you this access to truth, even though it's still circular. It's one that sort of gives you trust in truth.
Yes, I mean, I think that I think that is essentially the core difference between the two, right? Self-undermining versus self-reinforcing.
Yeah.
I just wanted to point out the epistemological, ontological thing, because I think oftentimes we sort of pretend that we can ground things more than we can. I mean, you know, you've got Wittgenstein's Uncertainty on your shelf, and he has this idea of a hinge statement, which is where a statement you eventually come to where you can neither justify it nor challenge it, because you can only justify propositions with more strongly held propositions, and you can only challenge propositions with more strongly held propositions. So you eventually get something that you can't justify or challenge, which, again, and I think that is sort of that could form a kind of theist way out of this Cartesian circle, where they just say, well, I say you've got to start somewhere.
In this second part, now let's address the real issue at hand here, the problem that the atheist and theist face. We all face an inevitable circular reasoning method while trying to justify our worldviews. For the Christians, we can say we trust our rationality because God grounds it. Or is the justification behind logic then, at the same time, we use that rationality or logic to reason or prove God, so it is circular? The atheist version is that you use evolution as a justification behind your logical faculties, then you use your same logical faculties to prove evolution. Nobody can get away with it. In more simpler terms, you use your epistemology to justify your ontology, then you use your ontology as justification for your epistemology. Now, the difference between the two is that the atheist circular reasoning is self-undermining because of evolution, as I pointed it out up there, using truth as abstract example. Being a materialist and believing in evolution undercut the reasons why you have to believe in evolution. The Christian circular reasoning is what we call self-reinforcing in contrast with atheist. What you have to know is that circular reasoning is not the same as vicious circularity. Some circularity is necessary. The key is whether it's coherent, explanatory, and consistent. The real test is which worldview best explains the tools of knowledge, logic, morality, and meaning. In this case, as Alex called the Christian circular reasoning pious to mark the stern difference between the two. And he goes even as far to say that materialist atheist circular reasoning creates some sort of a mess. Why is it important? The atheist claims that it is more reasonable to be an atheist than to believe in God. But wait, this dilemma undermines their proposition. Because how did they reasonably arrive to that conclusion if their own worldview undermines reason and logic? I mean, that's weird. The other issue is that I can even go as further as to say that materialism undermines science because science presupposes logic and reason. So materialism has got a big problem with science they claim to love and use to disprove God. I mean, it will be interesting to see your comment and what you think about this conversation. I would conclude then by saying that God is even a better justification to do science since he is a better grounding for it. If you are not a Christian, I would tell you that there are many good historical proof to believe in Jesus Christ. Life without God is ultimately meaningless. I will see you in the next video, and may God bless you.